The Joe Rogan Controversy. Joe Rogan done got himself labeled an anti-vaxxer and also had a montage of him dropping the N-word on the podcast put together long enough to score a sequel to American History X. You guys know how I feel about Rogan and his podcast. I'm definitely a ride or die. His podcast is largely responsible for me taking writing as seriously as I do now. It's the absolute reason why I podcast, and what I've gained from his show, how I've grown since being exposed to his show, I couldn't overstate. Let's start with the anti-vax portion of it. I never considered Rogan anti-vax. I don't think he considers himself anti-vax. But so many people put that label on him, and some credible people like Sam Harris, not necessarily put that label on him, but highlighted the dangers of having anti-vax type sentiments, voices on his podcast, on his platform. So if I step back and think of it objectively, part of me wonders, do I not think of him as anti-vax because I myself am vaccinated, and beyond me and my immediate orbit, it's like whatever, to each his own. But I really don't think it's that. And I honestly don't subscribe to the ideology, I guess it would be, of quote unquote not platforming someone that has a different viewpoint. I'm of the school of thought of everyone share their viewpoints. Let's poke holes in each other's ideas. Put me onto shit that I otherwise wouldn't know. And I hope I would do the same for you, and vice versa. By having that interchange of thoughts and ideas, which is the main reason why the Joe Rogan Experience podcast resonates with me so much, which I'm going to touch on or flesh out a bit more later in a piece that I wrote that I'm going to share with you guys at the end to wrap up the episode. But listening to the podcast, I get to hear differing opinions, and I get to take in all those inputs and make up my own mind. But it feels much more well-rounded when I have varying points of view and takes and perspectives on any given situation. And I feel like the folks that were attacking Rogan, at least on that vaccine front, came from folks that either had this belief that it was dangerous to have even an inquisitive conversation about alternative forms of combating COVID, or from folks that had a vested interest in something to gain from perpetuating the mainstream narrative, or just folks that don't listen to the pod like that and don't know or realize that Joe's had people on the podcast, like he does on most issues that get discussed on his show, from either side. And he's questioned them and been objective with them and curious with them in the way that us fans love and have grown to love, because he asks universal questions that we ourselves are thinking. And honestly, if you don't listen to the podcast, why do you care? Why do you even have an opinion? Or like, why, not even why you have an opinion, because I guess anybody can have an opinion about anything, but why do you feel like your opinion is even valid? Because you're literally speaking to something that you don't know enough about to speak about. You know what I mean? Like, if you're missing the context of what the show is, what the show is about, the historical context of it, you literally don't have the background to have a valid opinion. But anyway, I'm just coming from the side of appreciation of a space where this type of conversation of not worrying about partisan bullshit when it comes to politics or, you know, controversial issues like COVID and the vaccine, but just getting as much information from all sides as you can and putting it out there to be in the forefront for folks to digest and make their own decisions. And I honestly don't know where else we get that. Everything is so partisan now. And I feel like having a space like that, like this, like what the podcast is so important from that perspective. And instead of demonizing it, we should be propping it up as an example of what honest discourse can be. And it's like, I've seen Rogan have, you know, sitting congressmen like Dan Crenshaw on, and on the flip side, have Democratic Senator Bernie Sanders on, and like check each of them just with curiosity. They say, Bernie, you want to have Medicare for all? How do you pay for that? How does the math work out? And then Bernie, literally in a 2 or 3 hour long conversation, which where else are you going to have that? Uninterrupted live conversation, no commercial breaks, no talking points, no, you can only ask me this set of questions beforehand. None of that type of bullshit that you see in the mainstream. But tell me, how do you pay for that? And then Bernie breaking down his 0.5 cent tax on Wall Street trader speculation, which is 0.5 cent on every single speculation trade done on Wall Street. And that adds up to X amount of dollars, which is, according to Bernie, enough to fund Medicare for all, et cetera, et cetera. That could be like fucking up some of those details. So feel free to go back and listen to the episode. But it's like that type of conversation. Then on the flip side, when he has a Republican, Dan Crenshaw, sitting in front of him and the same topic comes up, he's like, oh, wait, Rogan's like, wait. I spoke to Bernie. He said with the Wall Street speculation or something like that, or blah, 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 blah. He broke it down this way, that Medicare for all could be paid for. So why are you saying that it can't? And he's saying that it can't. And then you get Crenshaw's perspective. And there's been guests that, on he's had simultaneously on that are on opposite sides. I'm forgetting the two gentlemen, but it was like around nutrition. One was like a pro paleo diet guy. The other one was something else. And, they were going back and forth with their facts and figures, and Rogan was like mediating it. And I also think that's something that's lost on folks that, again, aren't listeners, actual listeners of the show, is that the folks he has on are credible people for the most part. And the ones that have actually turned out not to be, he has gone on the show and said, yo, this guy I had on that I thought was an expert in this and that, wrote this book, and like the case in point, the bulletproof coffee guy, I forget his name, Dave Asprey. And he was even selling his like coffee shit and stuff like that on its website. It was like a really popular thing, the bulletproof coffee thing. It came out afterwards that Dave Asprey like stole that, like bulletproof coffee wasn't really his thing. Like it was somebody else's. He just like popularized it and was trying to like make money off of it. And Rogan right away, told the entire audience what went down, took all Dave Asprey's shit off his website and stopped selling it, like threw on it. So some folks have like slipped through the cracks like that. But for the most part, you're speaking about credible people, like professors of Columbia University and of other universities, not just Columbia, but, from prestigious institutions, Harvard professors, sitting politicians, like I just mentioned, congressmen and women, like a Dan Crenshaw, state senators, like a Bernie Sanders, literally sitting politicians right now, the governor of Texas, Governor Abbott, the mayor of Austin, Tulsi Gabbard when she was a sitting congresswoman and has been on several times after, actual elected officials that are not just giving talking points. They're not prepping for these interviews that, again, are live for hours long. Navy SEALs, doctors, epidemiologists. Going back to the COVID thing, it had Michael Osterholm on. It's not, these aren't like quack strip mall doctors. Oh, well, this one doctor that said he saw one patient and he thinks X, Y, and Z. No, Michael Osterholm is an epidemiologist, the director of the Center for Infectious Disease, and is literally on President Biden's COVID-19 advisory board. He's been on Rogan's podcast for 3 hours. And these folks, again, go on because it's literally the biggest platform on the planet. So if they have something to say that they want to get out there, Rogan's the way to do that. And I just think it's dangerous and like misguided and short-sighted to risk that no longer being a thing because on that one mainstream topic of vaccination, he wanted to dig deeper and ask questions while still pushing for his parents being vaccinated because they're older, or friends that have comorbidities that have been on the show that are overweight, etc., pushing all of them to get vaccinated, but also saying, hey, how come the government's not highlighting the fact that, being healthy and exercising is a preventative measure to getting COVID, that the fact that our country is so fucking fat and obese is why we have comorbidities, and why when we do get COVID, we're fucked because of those comorbidities, and we can prevent it by emphasizing exercising and being in shape, etc., and trying to put that message out there. But I digress on that. Now, switching gears to the N-word controversy. This one is definitely much less defensible. Again, as a longtime listener of the show, I've heard those episodes live when they happened 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, whenever it was. So me and, we as fans, fans of the podcast knew, like Rogan, that these episodes were out there. They always have been. Every instance where I did hear Rogan use the N-word was never maliciously or like saying it at somebody. So that's 100% off the table. It was always like in the context of speaking about the word or quoting a Red Fox joke or a rap lyric and like speaking about like the power of that word and how we as a society have infused that word with so much power and that there's no other word like that, et cetera, et cetera. So I definitely want to clarify that point. But the argument to be made is one that Rogan himself agrees with, which is it's not his word to use. That was in his apology video that he put out. And even afterwards, as you know, he's spoken about it with guests on his podcast. You know, it was a relief because, again, he knew those clips of videos or past episodes rather were out there. He knew he had said it on the air. Again, to the critique of, you know, he's such a big show, $100+ million deal with Spotify, et cetera, et cetera. Why couldn't he like edit it afterwards? And another thing that's hard for folks to like wrap their heads around. Rogan does all his own booking. Every single guest that's been there is because he's like literally DM them or like text them or people that he wanted to speak with or like read their books and reached out to them or asked his management to reach out to them. You know, it's not like a curated show like that. It's not, there's not a lot of production going on. It's literally him and Jamie, which is the producer of the show, working the cameras and the audio boards. That's it. And the show's up until, I want to say, a few months before making the move to Spotify, he switched the shows to not being live. But every single episode of every single show up until that point was live on air. Like you stream it live on YouTube while the show's recording and then listen to the show, as I had done many times after watching it live on YouTube. Listen to the show when it comes out on the podcast apps right afterwards. And it's literally the same exact thing verbatim. Like they were literally live. So that's just to answer the question that I've seen some folks ask. If he really felt bad about it, why didn't he go back and edit it? There's your answer. But again, to Rogan's credit, after that out of context clip came out, he put out an apology, as he should have, and reiterated, you know, the actual context of the clips, but reinforced the fact that he understands and knows that it's not his word to use and he won't use it, etc. And again, to his credit, when the whole anti-vaxxer shit was hitting the fan, he put out a statement for that. And even though, like I touched on, his show is well-rounded, at least from my perspective, and he has people from different sides on, you know, it's not like he'll have them on at the exact same time. Usually there's like some shows like that, but definitely not commonplace. And he'll have them on, have, let's say, a Republican congressman on, and then the next, you know, few weeks worth of shows will be like comedians and musicians and authors and, you know, just different topics, astrophysicists, and then he'll have a Democratic senator on. You know what I mean? So it's not like he has them on, like the different perspectives or scenarios, but if you're not a constant listener or watcher of the show, you're not going to get that context, you know? But to his credit, he put out that maybe something that he should do that he's going to think of working on is having those opposing voices closer together on. So from an attention span perspective, I guess, of the audience, it'll make more sense and be a more balanced view, which again, this is not something that he has to do, but to his credit, he put that out there. And with the N-word controversy and those like controversial shows, he himself, which Spotify corroborated, removed those episodes from Spotify, even though they're out there on the internet, because once something's down the internet, it's out on the internet, but he removed them from Spotify, which Spotify itself does not have the right to do because of their licensing agreement. But yeah, man, I think the Joe Rogan podcast is a national treasure and should be treated as such. It's my opinion. And I really think that we as consumers should move away from the tendency to cut off our noses to spite our face. Remember, each and every one of us have the right and the ability to control our inputs, what we take in, what we watch, what we listen to, what we read. Trying to attack and minimize and erase things that are out there that we might not agree with won't change that fact.